The Sahel, a vast semi-arid belt of land stretching across Africa from Senegal in the west to Sudan in the east, has long been a theater of both resilience and conflict. For decades, this region has been at the center of complex struggles involving insurgencies, climate change, poverty, foreign interventions, and shifting geopolitical rivalries. Today, new warnings and reports suggest that France may be preparing to escalate its military posture in the Sahel, sparking widespread speculation and putting Africa on high alert. To understand the weight of such a development, one must examine the historical context of French involvement in the region, the intricate web of alliances and rivalries, and the implications for Africa's political and security future. France's role in the Sahel is deeply rooted in colonial history. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad were once part of French West Africa, subjected to economic exploitation and political domination. Even after gaining independence in the 1960s, these states remained tethered to Paris through economic arrangements, military agreements, and political influence. This enduring relationship, sometimes referred to as France-Afrique, ensured that France maintained a hand in shaping the destinies of these nations, often to secure its own interests, including access to natural resources like uranium from Niger and oil from Chad. The modern chapter of French military engagement began in earnest with Operation Serval in 2013, when France intervened to prevent Islamist militants from seizing Bamako, the capital of Mali. The intervention was initially welcomed as it pushed extremist fighters back into remote areas. However, what was supposed to be a short-term operation transformed into a long-term military campaign. Operation Barkhane replaced Serval in 2014, expanding French military operations across 5 Sahel countries: Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Mauritania, with thousands of troops stationed in the region. Supported by advanced drones, fighter jets, and armored vehicles, France positioned itself as a key security actor in the fight against insurgencies. Despite this vast military presence, security in the Sahel deteriorated. Jihadist groups linked to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State adapted to French strategies, embedding themselves within local communities, exploiting grievances, and expanding into new territories. Entire villages were caught in the crossfire, with civilians bearing the brunt of the violence. Critics argue that France's military-heavy approach failed to address the root causes of extremism, such as poverty, weak governance, and marginalization of rural populations. This perception fueled resentment among Sahelian populations, with growing anti-French sentiment erupting in protests across Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey in recent years. This discontent has grown into political upheaval. Military-led governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger openly distanced themselves from Paris, demanding the withdrawal of French forces. In Mali, the ruling junta expelled the French ambassador and turned to alternative partners, including Russia's Wagner Group, for security assistance. Burkina Faso followed a similar path, severing defense agreements with France and calling for a new era of sovereignty. Niger, once considered France's closest ally in the region, witnessed a military coup in 2023 that further destabilized the regional order and called French partnerships into question. Against this backdrop, reports that France is preparing a new military strike or escalation in the Sahel ring alarm bells. Paris faces a dilemma: retreat completely and risk losing influence in a region it long considered within its sphere, or reassert itself militarily to counter the shifting balance of power. French policymakers frame their presence as necessary to fight terrorism, stabilize fragile states, and protect European interests. Yet African governments and populations increasingly interpret these actions as neocolonial intrusions, designed to maintain dominance rather than foster genuine partnerships. If France does indeed prepare to strike, several key motivations could be at play. First, the threat of terrorism remains a serious concern, with armed groups continuing to expand their foothold and conduct cross-border attacks. France may believe that withdrawing entirely would create a vacuum that extremists could exploit, posing not only a regional threat but also a danger to Europe through migration and potential terror networks. Second, resource security cannot be ignored. Niger's uranium is vital for fueling French nuclear power plants, which generate most of the country's electricity. Disruptions in supply combined with growing competition from other global powers, particularly China and Russia, could push France toward more aggressive tactics. Third, France's international standing is at stake. A retreat from the Sahel would be interpreted globally as a loss of influence, undermining Paris's claim to be a major global player with responsibilities beyond Europe. For African nations, however, the prospect of a renewed French strike raises profound concerns. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who have positioned themselves as defenders of sovereignty, see foreign intervention as a direct challenge to national independence. A military escalation by France could reignite public outrage, mobilize nationalist movements, and potentially trigger wider regional instability. Instead of weakening extremist groups, such action could provide them with propaganda fuel, allowing them to portray themselves as defenders of African dignity against foreign invaders. The geopolitical implications extend beyond Africa. Russia has sought to expand its influence in the Sahel, presenting itself as an alternative partner through arms deals, mercenaries, and political support. China, while less militarily engaged, has deepened its economic presence through infrastructure investments and resource extraction. A French escalation would likely intensify the competition, turning the Sahel into an arena for global power rivalry. This could mirror Cold War-style dynamics, with local populations caught between competing external actors. There is also the matter of African regional organizations. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has struggled to maintain unity in the face of coups and rising authoritarianism. Its credibility is under strain, and a French intervention could further divide its members. Some governments, still reliant on French support, may quietly welcome military action, while others would denounce it as illegitimate interference. Such divisions risk weakening Africa's ability to craft collective responses to security and political crises. The humanitarian consequences of any French strike must also be considered. The Sahel is home to some of the world's most vulnerable populations, already facing food insecurity, droughts, and displacement. Escalating military operations could exacerbate these crises, displacing more civilians, disrupting humanitarian aid, and fueling cycles of violence. The region's fragile economies, dependent on agriculture and pastoralism, cannot withstand prolonged instability without plunging millions into deeper poverty. Yet, despite these risks, the question remains, is France truly preparing to strike, or are these warnings exaggerated? French officials, aware of the growing backlash against their presence, are cautious about openly committing to new operations. However, history demonstrates that France often acts decisively when its strategic interests are perceived to be under threat. The possibility of limited strikes, covert operations, or increased military support to allied governments cannot be dismissed. For African leaders, the challenge lies in navigating this precarious moment. Rejecting neocolonialism while ensuring national security requires careful balancing. Some may seek to strengthen ties with Russia or China, while others may call for purely African solutions through regional defense pacts and greater cooperation among Sahel states. The rhetoric of sovereignty must be matched with investments in governance, development, and social cohesion to ensure that foreign powers no longer find easy entry points into domestic affairs. The African people, too, play a decisive role. The surge of protests and mobilizations in recent years illustrates a growing political consciousness. Citizens are no longer passive recipients of foreign decisions, but active voices demanding accountability and independence. Their pressure has already reshaped political landscapes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Should France escalate again, it is likely to face not only government resistance, but also widespread popular opposition. Ultimately, the Sahel stands at a crossroads. On one side lies the risk of prolonged instability, foreign interventions, and deepening geopolitical rivalries. On the other lies the possibility of a new era of African agency where nations chart their own security and development paths, free from external domination. Whether France prepares to strike or retreats into the background, the decisions made in the coming months will shape the region's future for generations. The world must therefore watch the Sahel with both caution and humility. Any strike, intervention, or escalation is not merely a matter of military tactics, but a test of global principles. Will the sovereignty of African nations be respected, or will history repeat itself in cycles of domination? Will external actors prioritize stability and partnership, or will they pursue narrow interests at the expense of African lives? These questions linger heavily over the Sahel as Africa waits, alert and determined, for what may come next.